Disc 2.
"Yes," said Ernest. "It is a penguin, I think. It let me get quite close, so that I knocked it on the head with a stick. Here are its head and feet, which I preserved to show you. The bill is, you see, narrow and curved downwards, and the feet are webbed. It had funny little bits of useless wings, and its eyes looked so solemnly and sedately at me that I was almost ashamed to kill it. Do you not think it must have been a penguin?" "I have little doubt on the matter, my boy, and I was about to make a few remarks on the habits of this bird when my wife interrupted me and begged us to come to dinner and continue our natural history conversation at some future time. We then sat down before the appetizing meal prepared for us, our gourds coming for the first time into use, and having done it full justice, produced the coconuts by way of dessert. "Here is better food for your little friend," said I to Fritz, who had been vainly endeavoring to persuade the monkey to taste dainty morsels of the food we had been eating. "The poor little animal has been accustomed to nothing but its mother's milk. Fetch me a saw, one of you." I then, after extracting the milk of the nuts from their natural holes, carefully cut the shells in half, thus providing several more useful basins. The monkey was perfectly satisfied with the milk, and eagerly sucked the corner of a handkerchief dipped in it. Fritz now suddenly recollected his delicious wine, and producing his flask, begged his mother to taste it. "Try it first yourself," said I. Fritz did so, and I instantly saw by his countenance that the liquor had passed through the first stage of fermentation and had become vinegar. "Never mind, my boy," said my prudent wife, when she learned the cause of his wry faces. "We have wine already, but no vinegar. I am really pleased with the transformation." The sun was now rapidly sinking behind the horizon, and the poultry retiring for the night warned us that we must follow their example. Having offered up our prayers, we lay down on our beds, the monkey crouched down between Jack and Fritz, and we were all soon fast asleep. We did not, however, long enjoy this repose. A loud barking from our dogs, who were on guard outside the tent, awakened us, and the fluttering and cackling of our poultry warned us that a foe was approaching. Fritz and I sprang up, and seizing our guns, rushed out. There we found a desperate combat going on. Our gallant dogs, surrounded by a dozen or more large jackals, were fighting bravely. 4 of their opponents lay dead, but the others were in no way deterred by the fate of their comrades. Fritz and I, however, sent bullets through the heads of a couple more, and the rest galloped off. Turk and Juno did not intend that they should escape so cheaply, and pursuing them, they caught, killed, and devoured another of the animals, regardless of their near relationship. Fritz wished to save one of the jackals, that he might be able to show it to his brothers in the morning. Dragging, therefore, the one that he had shot near the tent, he concealed it, and we once more returned to our beds. Soundly and peacefully we slept until cock-crow next morning, when my wife and I awoke and began to discuss the business of the day. "It seems absolutely necessary, my dear wife," I began, "to return at once to the wreck while it is yet calm, that we may save the poor animals left there, and bring on shore many articles of infinite value to us, which, if we do not now recover, we may finally lose entirely. On the other hand, I feel that there is an immense deal to be done on shore, and that I ought not to leave you in such an insecure shelter as this tent." "Return to the wreck by all means," replied my wife cheerfully. "Patience, order, and perseverance will help us through all our work, and I agree with you that a visit to the wreck is without doubt our first duty. Come, let us wake the children and set to work without delay." They were soon roused, and Fritz, overcoming his drowsiness before the others, ran out for his jackal. It was cold and stiff from the night air, and he placed it on its legs before the tent in a most lifelike attitude, and stood by to watch the effect upon the family. The dogs were the first to perceive their enemy, and growling, seemed inclined to dispose of the animal as they had disposed of its brethren in the night, but Fritz called them off. The noise the dogs made, however, had the effect of bringing out the younger children, and many were the exclamations they made at the sight of the strange animal. "A yellow dog!" cried Franz. "A wolf!" exclaimed Jack. "It is a striped fox," said Ernest. "Hullo," said Fritz. "The greatest men may make mistakes. Our professor does not know a jackal when he sees one." "But really," continued Ernest, examining the animal, "I think it is a fox." Very well, retorted Fritz. "No doubt you know better than your father. He thinks it is a jackal." "Come, boys," said I, "no more of this quarreling. You are none of you very wrong, for the jackal partakes of the nature of all three, dog, wolf, and fox." The monkey had come out on Jack's shoulder, but no sooner did it catch sight of the jackal than it fled precipitately back into the tent, and hid itself in a heap of moss until nothing was visible but the tip of its little nose. Jack soothed and comforted the frightened little animal, and I then summoned them all to prayers, soon after which we began our breakfast. So severely had we dealt with our supper the previous night that we had little to eat but the biscuits, which were so dry and hard that, hungry as we were, we could not swallow much. Fritz and I took some cheese to help them down, while my wife and younger sons soaked theirs in water. Ernest roamed down to the shore and looked about for shellfish. Presently he returned with a few whelks. "Ah," said he, "if we had but some butter." "My good boy," I replied, "your perpetual if, quite annoys me. Why do you not sit down and eat cheese like the rest of us?" "Not while I can get butter," he said. "See here, father." And he pointed to a large cask. "That barrel contains butter of some sort or another, for it is oozing out at the end." "Really, Ernest," I said, "we are indebted to you. I will open the cask." So saying, I took a knife and carefully cut a small hole so that I could extract the butter without exposing the mass of it to the effects of the air and heat. Feeling a coconut shell, we once more sat down, and toasting our biscuits before the fire, spread them with the good Dutch butter. We found this vastly better than the dry biscuit, and while we were thus employed, I noticed that the two dogs were lying unusually quietly by my side. I at first attributed this drowsiness to their large meal during the night, but I soon discovered that it arose from a different cause. The faithful animals had not escaped unhurt from their late combat, but had received several deep and painful wounds, especially about the neck. The dogs began to lick each other on the places which they could not reach with their own tongues, and my wife carefully dressed the wounds with butter, from which she had extracted the salt by washing. A sudden thought now struck Ernest, and he wisely remarked that if we were to make spiked collars for the dogs, they would in future escape such dangerous wounds. "Oh, yes," exclaimed Jack, "and I will make them, may I not, father?" "Try by all means, my little fellow," said I, "and persuade your mother to assist you. And now, Fritz," I continued, "we must be starting, for you and I are to make a trip to the wreck." I begged the party who were to remain on shore to keep together as much as possible, and having arranged a set of signals with my wife that we might exchange communications, asked a blessing on our enterprise. I erected a signal post, and while Fritz was making preparations for our departure, hoisted a strip of sailcloth as a flag. This flag was to remain hoisted so long as all was well on shore, but should our return be desired, 3 shots were to be fired and the flag lowered. All was now ready, and warning my wife that we might find it necessary to remain all night on the vessel, we tenderly bade adieu and embarked. Except our guns and ammunition, we were taking nothing, that we might leave as much space as possible for the stowage of a large cargo. Fritz, however, had resolved to bring his little monkey, that he might obtain milk for it as soon as possible. We had not got far from the shore when I perceived that a current from the river set in directly for the vessel, and though my nautical knowledge was not great, I succeeded in steering the boat into the favorable stream, which carried us nearly 3/4 of our passage with little or no trouble to ourselves. Then, by dint of hard pulling, we accomplished the whole distance, and entering through the breach, gladly made fast our boat and stepped on board. Our first care was to see to the animals, who greeted us with joy, lowing, bellowing, and bleating as we approached. Not that the poor beasts were hungry, for they were all still well supplied with food, but they were apparently pleased by the mere sight of human beings. Fritz then placed his monkey by one of the goats, and the little animal immediately sucked the milk with evident relish, chattering and grinning all the while. The monkey provided for, we refreshed ourselves with some wine and biscuits. "Now," said I, "we have plenty to do. Where shall we begin?" "Let us fix a mast and sail to our boat," answered Fritz, "for the current which brought us out will not take us back, whereas the fresh breeze we met would help us immensely had we but a sail." "Capital thought," I replied. "Let us set to work at once." I chose a stout spar to serve as a mast, and having made a hole in a plank nailed across one of the tubs, we, with the help of a rope and a couple of blocks, stepped it and secured it with stays. We then discovered a lug sail, which had belonged to one of the ship's boats. This we hoisted, and our craft was ready to sail. Fritz begged me to decorate the masthead with a red streamer, to give our vessel a more finished appearance. Smiling at this childish but natural vanity, I complied with his request. I then contrived a rudder, that I might be able to steer the boat, for though I knew that an oar would serve the purpose, it was cumbrous and inconvenient. While I was thus employed, Fritz examined the shore with his glass, and soon announced that the flag was flying and all was well. So much time had now slipped away that we found we could not return that night, as I had wished. We signaled our intention of remaining on board, and then spent the rest of our time in taking out the stones we had placed in the boat for ballast, and stowed in their place heavy articles of value to us. The ship had sailed for the purpose of supplying a young colony. She had therefore on board every conceivable article we could desire in our present situation. Our only difficulty, indeed, was to make a wise selection. A large quantity of powder and shot we first secured, and as Fritz considered that we could not have too many weapons, we added 3 excellent guns and a whole armful of swords, daggers, and knives. We remembered that knives and forks were necessary. We therefore laid in a large stock of them, and kitchen utensils of all sorts. Exploring the captain's cabin, we discovered a service of silver plate and a cellaret of good old wine. We then went over the stores and supplied ourselves with potted meats, portable soups, Westphalian hams, sausages, a bag of maize and wheat, and a quantity of other seeds and vegetables. I then added a barrel of sulphur for matches, and as much cordage as I could find. All this, with nails, tools, and agricultural implements, completed our cargo, and sank our boat so low that I should have been obliged to lighten her had not the sea been calm. Night drew on, and a large fire, lighted by those on shore, showed us that all was well. We replied by hoisting 4 ship's lanterns, and 2 shots announced us that our signal was perceived. Then, with a heartfelt prayer for the safety of our dear ones on shore, we retired to our boat, and Fritz, at all events, was soon sound asleep. For a while I could not sleep. The thought of my wife and children, alone and unprotected save by the great dogs, disturbed my rest. The night at length passed away. At daybreak, Fritz and I arose and went on deck. I brought the telescope to bear upon the shore, and with pleasure saw the flag still waving in the morning breeze. While I kept the glass directed to the land, I saw the door of the tent open, and my wife appear and look steadfastly towards us. I at once hoisted a white flag, and in reply the flag on shore was thrice dipped. Oh, what a weight seemed lifted from my heart as I saw the signal. "Fritz," I said, "I am not now in such haste to get back, and begin to feel compassion for all these poor beasts. I wish we could devise some means for getting them on shore." "We might make a raft," suggested Fritz, "and take off one or two at a time." "True," I replied. "It is easy enough to say, 'make a raft,' but to do it is quite another thing." "Well," said Fritz, "I can think of nothing else, unless indeed we make them such swimming belts as you made for the children." "Really, my boy, that idea is worth having. I am not joking, indeed," I continued as I saw him smile. "We may get every one of the animals ashore in that way." So saying, I caught a fine sheep and proceeded to put our plan into execution. I first fastened a broad piece of linen round its belly, and to this attached some corks and empty tins. Then, with Fritz's help, I flung the animal into the sea. It sank, but a moment afterwards rose and floated famously. "Hurrah!" exclaimed Fritz. "We will treat them all like that." We then rapidly caught the other animals, and provided them one after the other with a similar contrivance. The cow and ass gave us more trouble than did the others, for them we required something more buoyant than the mere cork. We at last found some empty casks, and fastened two to each animal by thongs passed under its belly. This done, the whole herd were ready to start, and we brought the ass to one of the ports to be the first to be launched. After some maneuvering, we got him in a convenient position, and then a sudden heave sent him plunging into the sea. He sank, and then, buoyed by the casks, emerged head and back from the water. The cow, sheep, and goats followed him one after the other, and then the sow alone remained. She seemed, however, determined not to leave the ship. She kicked, struggled, and squealed so violently that I really thought we should be obliged to abandon her. At length, after much trouble, we succeeded in sending her out of the port after the others, and when once in the water, such was the old lady's energy that she quickly distanced them and was the first to reach the shore. We had fastened the horns or neck of each animal a cord with a float attached to the end, and now embarking, we gathered up these floats, set sail, and steered for shore, drawing our herd after us. Delighted with the successful accomplishment of our task, we got out some biscuits and enjoyed a midday meal. Then, while Fritz amused himself with his monkey, I took up my glass and tried to make out how our dear ones on shore were employing themselves. As I was thus engaged, a sudden shout from Fritz surprised me. I glanced up. There stood Fritz with his gun to his shoulder, pointing it at a huge shark. The monster was making for one of the finest sheep. He turned on his side to seize his prey. As the white of his belly appeared, Fritz fired. The shot took effect, and our enemy disappeared, leaving a trace of blood on the calm water. "Well done, my boy," I cried. "You will become a crack shot one of these days, but I trust you will not often have such dangerous game to shoot." Fritz's eyes sparkled at his success and my praise, and reloading his gun, carefully watched the water. But the shark did not again appear, and borne onwards by the breeze, we quickly neared the shore. Steering the boat to a convenient landing place, I cast off the ropes which secured the animals and let them get ashore as best they might. There was no sign of my wife or children when we stepped on land, but a few moments afterwards they appeared, and with a shout of joy ran towards us. We were thankful to be once more united, and after asking and replying to a few preliminary questions, proceeded to release our herd from their swimming belts, which, though so useful in the water, were exceedingly inconvenient on shore. My wife was astonished at the apparatus. "How clever you are," said she. "I am not the inventor," I replied. "The honor is due to Fritz. He not only thought of this plan for bringing off the animals, but saved one at least of them from a most fearful death." And I then told them how bravely he had encountered the shark. My wife was delighted with her son's success, but declared that she would dread our trips to the vessel more than ever, knowing that such savage fish inhabited the waters. Fritz, Ernest, and I began the work of unloading our craft, while Jack, seeing that the poor donkey was still encumbered with his swimming belt, tried to free him from it. But the donkey would not stand quiet, and the child's fingers were not strong enough to loosen the cordage. Finally, therefore, he scrambled upon the animal's back, and urging him on with hand and foot, trotted towards us. "Come, my boy," I said. "No one must be idle here, even for a moment. You will have riding practice enough hereafter. Dismount and come and help us." Jack was soon on his feet. "But I have not been idle all day," he said. "Look here." And he pointed to a belt round his waist. It was a broad belt of yellow hair, in which he had stuck a couple of pistols and a knife. "And see," he added, "what I have made for the dogs. Here, Juno, tuck." The dogs came bounding up at his call, and I saw that they were each supplied with a collar of the same skin, in which were fastened nails, which bristled round their necks in a most formidable manner. "Capital! Capital, my boy," said I. "But where did you get your materials, and who helped you?" "Except in cutting the skin," said my wife, "he had no assistance. And as for the materials, Fritz's jackal supplied us with the skin, and the needles and thread came out of my wonderful bag." Fritz evidently did not approve of the use to which his jackal's hide had been devoted, and holding his nose, begged his little brother to keep at a distance. "Really, Jack," he said, "you should have cured the hide before you used it. The smell is disgusting. Don't come near me." "It's not the hide that smells at all," retorted Jack. "It is your nasty jackal itself that you left in the sun." "Now, boys," said I, "no quarreling here. Do you, Jack, help your brother to drag the carcass to the sea, and if your belt smells after that, you must take it off and dry it better." The jackal was dragged off, and we then finished our work of unloading our boat. When this was accomplished, we started for our tent, and finding there no preparation for supper, I said, "Fritz, let us have a Westphalian ham." "Ernest," said my wife, smiling, "let us see if we cannot conjure up some eggs." Fritz got out a splendid ham and carried it to his mother triumphantly, while Ernest set before me a dozen white balls with parchment-like coverings. "Turtles' eggs," said I. "Well done, Ernest. Where did you get them?" "That," replied my wife, "shall be told in due course when we relate our adventures. Now we will see what they will do towards making a supper for you. With these and your ham, I do not think we shall starve." Leaving my wife to prepare supper, we returned to the shore and brought up what of the cargo we had left there. Then, having collected our herd of animals, we returned to the tent. The meal which awaited us was as unlike the first supper we had there enjoyed as possible. My wife had improvised the table of a board laid on 2 casks. On this was spread a white damask tablecloth, on which were placed knives, forks, spoons, and plates for each person. A tureen of good soup first appeared, followed by a capital omelette, then slices of the ham, and finally some Dutch cheese, butter, and biscuits, with a bottle of the captain's Canary wine, completed the repast. While we thus regaled ourselves, I related to my wife our adventures, and then begged she would remember her promise and tell me all that had happened in my absence. Chapter 3. "I will spare you a description," said my wife, "of our first day's occupations. Truth to tell, I spent the time chiefly in anxious thought and watching your progress on signals. I rose very early this morning, and with the utmost joy perceiving your signal that all was right, hastened to reply to it. And then, while my sons yet slumbered, I sat down and began to consider how our position could be improved. For it is perfectly impossible, said I to myself, to live much longer where we are now. The sun beats burningly the livelong day on this bare, rocky spot. Our only shelter is this poor tent, beneath the canvas of which the heat is even more oppressive than on the open shore. Why should not I and my little boys exert ourselves as well as my husband and Fritz? Why should not we, too, try to accomplish something useful? If we could but exchange this melancholy and unwholesome abode for a pleasant, shady dwelling place, we should all improve in health and spirits. Among those delightful woods and groves, where Fritz and his father saw so many charming things, I feel sure there must be some little retreat where we could establish ourselves comfortably. There must be, and I will find it." By this time the boys were up, and I observed Jack very quietly and busily occupied with his knife about the spot where Fritz's jackal lay. Watching his proceedings, I saw that he had cut 2 long, narrow strips of the animal's skin, which he cleaned and scraped very carefully, and then taking a handful of great nails out of his pocket, he stuck them through the skin, points outward, after which he cut strips of canvas sailcloth twice as broad as the thongs, doubled them, and laid them on the raw side of the skin so as to cover the broad, flat nail heads. At this point of the performance, Master Jack came to me with the agreeable request that I would kindly stitch the canvas and moist skin together for him. I gave him needles and thread, but could not think of depriving him of the pleasure of doing it himself. However, when I saw how good-humoredly he persevered in the work with his awkward, unskilful fingers, I took pity upon him. On conquering the disgust I felt, finished lining the skin dog collars he had so ingeniously contrived. After this, I was called upon to complete in the same way a fine belt of skin he had made for himself. I advised him to think of some means by which the skin might be kept from shrinking. Ernest, although rather treating Jack's manufacture with ridicule, proposed a sensible enough plan, which Jack forthwith put in execution. He nailed the skin, stretched flat on a board, and put it in the sun to dry. My scheme of a journey was agreed to joyously by my young companions. Preparations were instantly set on foot, weapons and provisions provided, the 2 elder boys carrying guns, while they gave me charge of the water flask and a small hatchet. Leaving everything in as good order as we could at the tent, we proceeded towards the stream, accompanied by the dogs. Turk, who had accompanied you on your first expedition, seemed immediately to understand that we wished to pursue the same route, and proudly led the way. As I looked at my 2 young sons, each with his gun, and considered how much the safety of the party depended on these little fellows, I felt grateful to you, dear husband, for having acquainted them in childhood with the use of firearms. Filling our water jar, we crossed the stream and went on to the height from whence, as you described, a lovely prospect is obtained, at the sight of which a pleasurable sensation of buoyant hope, to which I had long been a stranger, awoke within my breast. A pretty little wood in the distance attracted my notice particularly, and thither we directed our course. But soon finding it impossible to force our way through the tall, strong grass, which grew in dense luxuriance higher than the children's heads, we turned towards the open beach on our left, and following it we reached a point much nearer the little wood, when, quitting the strand, we made towards it. We had not entirely escaped the tall grass, however, and with the utmost fatigue and difficulty were struggling through the reeds, when suddenly a great rushing noise terrified us all dreadfully. A very large and powerful bird sprang upward on the wing. Both boys attempted to take aim, but the bird was far away before they were ready to fire. "Oh dear, what a pity!" exclaimed Ernest. "Now if I had only had my light gun, and if the bird had not flown quite so fast, I should have brought him down directly." "Oh yes," said I. "No doubt you would be a capital sportsman if only your game would always give you time to make ready comfortably. But I had no notion that anything was going to fly up just at our feet like that," cried he. "A good shot," I replied, "must be prepared for surprises. Neither wild birds nor wild beasts will send you notice that they are about to fly or to run." "What sort of bird can it have been?" inquired Jack. "Oh, it certainly must have been an eagle," answered little Franz. "It was so very big." "Just as if every big bird must be an eagle," replied Ernest, in a tone of derision. "Let's see where he was sitting at all events," said I. Jack sprang towards the place, and instantly a second bird, rather larger than the first, rushed upward into the air with a most startling noise. The boys stood staring upwards, perfectly stupefied, while I laughed heartily, saying, "Well, you are first-rate sportsmen, to be sure. You certainly will keep my larder famously well supplied." At this, Ernest coloured up and looked inclined to cry, while Jack put on a comical face, pulled off his cap, and with a low bow called after the fugitive, "Adieu for the present, sir. I live in hopes of another meeting." On searching the ground carefully, we discovered a rude sort of nest made untidily of dry grass. It was empty, although we perceived broken eggshells at no great distance, and concluded that the young brood had escaped among the grass, which, in fact, we could see was waving at a little distance as the little birds ran through it. "Now look here, Franz," said Ernest presently. "Just consider how this bird could by any possibility have been an eagle. Eagles never build on the ground, neither can their young leave the nest and run as soon as they are out of the egg. That is a peculiarity of the gallinaceous tribe of birds alone, to which, then, these must belong. The species, I think, is indicated by the white belly and dull red color of the wing coverts, which I observed in these specimens, and I believe them to be bustards, especially as I noticed in the largest the fine mustache-like feathers over the beak, peculiar to the great bustard." "My dear boy," I said, "your eyes were actively employed, I must confess, if your fingers were unready with the gun. And after all, it is just as well, perhaps, that we have not thrown the bustard's family into mourning." Thus chatting, we at length approached my pretty wood. Numbers of birds fluttered and sang among the high branches, but I did not encourage the boys in their wish to try to shoot any of the happy little creatures. We were lost in admiration of the trees of this grove, and I cannot describe to you how wonderful they are, nor can you form the least idea of their enormous size without seeing them yourself. What we had been calling a wood proved to be a group of about 12 trees only, and, what was strange, the roots sustained the massive trunks exalted in the air, forming strong arches and props and stays all around each individual stem, which was firmly rooted in the center. I gave Jack some twine, and scrambling up one of the curious open-air roots, he succeeded in measuring round the trunk itself, and made it out to be 18 yards. I saw no sort of fruit, but the foliage is thick and abundant, throwing delicious shade on the ground beneath, which is carpeted with soft green herbage, and entirely free from thorns, briars, or bushes of any kind. It is the most charming resting place that ever was seen, and I and the boys enjoyed our midday meal immensely in this glorious palace of the woods, so grateful to our senses after the glare and heat of our journey thither. The dogs joined us after a while. They had lingered behind on the seashore, and I was surprised to see them lie down and go comfortably to sleep without begging for food, as they do usually when we eat. The longer we remained in this enchanting place, the more did it charm my fancy, and if we could but manage to live in some sort of dwelling, up among the branches of those grand, noble trees, I should feel perfectly safe and happy. It seemed to me absurd to suppose we should ever find another place half so lovely, so I determined to search no further, but return to the beach and see if anything from the wreck had been cast up by the waves, which we could carry away with us. Before starting, Jack persuaded me to sit quietly a little longer, and finish making his belt and the spike collars for the dogs, for you must know that the child had actually been carrying the board on which these were stretched all this time, so that they should get the full benefit of the sun. As they were now quite dry, I completed them easily, and Jack girded on the belt with great pride, placing his pistols in it, and marching about in a most self-important style, while Ernest fitted the collars on the two dogs. On reaching the shore, we found it strewn with many articles, doubtless of value, but all too heavy for us to lift. We rolled some casks, however, beyond high water mark, and dragged a chest or two also higher on the beach, and while doing so observed that our dogs were busy among the rocks. They were carefully watching the crevices and pools, and every now and then would pounce downwards and seize something which they swallowed with apparent relish. "They are eating crabs," said Jack. "No wonder they have not seemed hungry lately." And sure enough, they were catching the little green crabs with which the water abounded. These, however, did not apparently entirely satisfy them. Some time afterwards, just as we were about to turn inland towards the ford, we noticed that Juno was scraping in the sand and turning up some round substances, which she hastily devoured. Ernest went to see what these were, and reported in his calm way that the dog had found turtles' eggs. "Oh," cried I, "then let us by all means share in the booty." Mrs. Juno, however, did not at all approve of this, and it was with some difficulty that we drove her aside while we gathered a couple of dozen of the eggs, stowing them in our provision bags. While thus employed, we caught sight of a sail which appeared to be merrily approaching the shore beyond the cliffs. Ernest declared it must be our raft. Little Franz, always having the fear of savages before his eyes, began to look frightened, and for a moment I myself was doubtful what to think. However, we hastened to the stream, and crossing it by the stepping stones, came in sight of the landing place, where we joyfully met you. Now I hope you approve of the proceedings of your exploring party, and that tomorrow you will do me the favor of packing everything up and taking us away to live amongst my splendid trees." "Aye, little wife," said I. "So that is your idea of comfort and security, is it? A tree, I do not know how many feet high, on which we are to perch and roost like the birds. If we had but wings or a balloon, it would, I own, be a capital plan." "Laugh as much as you like," returned my wife. "My idea is not so absurd as you make it out. We should be safe up there from jackals' visits during the night, and I know I have seen at home in Switzerland quite a pretty arbor with a strong floor up among the branches of a lime tree, and we went up a staircase to reach it. Why could not we contrive a place like that, where we could sleep safely at night?" "I will consider the idea seriously, my wife," said I. "Perhaps something may come of it after all. Meantime, as we have finished supper, and night is coming on, let us commend ourselves to Almighty protection and retire to rest." Beneath the shelter of our tent we all slept soundly, like marmots, until break of day, when my wife and I, awaking, took counsel together as to future proceedings. Referring to the task she had the previous evening proposed for me, I remarked that to undertake it would involve so many difficulties that it was highly necessary to look closely into the subject. "In the first place," said I am unwilling hastily to quit a spot to which I am convinced we were providentially led as a landing place. See how secure it is, guarded on all sides by these high cliffs, and accessible only by the narrow passage to the ford, while from this point it is so easy to reach the ship that the whole of its valuable cargo is at our disposal. Suppose we decide to stay patiently here for the present, until at least we have brought on shore everything we possibly can." "I agree with you to a certain extent, dear husband," replied she, "but you do not know how dreadfully the heat among the rocks tries me. It is almost intolerable to us who remain here all day, while you and Fritz are away out at sea, or wandering among the shady woods, where cool fruits refresh and fair scenes delight you. As to the contents of the ship, an immense deal has been cast ashore, and I would much rather give up all the remainder, and be spared the painful anxiety it gives me when you even talk of venturing again on the faithless deep." "Well, I must admit that there is much right on your side," I continued. "Suppose we were to remove to your chosen abode, and make this rocky fastness our magazine and place of retreat in case of danger. I could easily render it still more secure by blasting portions of the rock with gunpowder. But a bridge must be constructed in the first place to enable us to cross, bag and baggage." "Oh, I shall be parched to death before we can leave this place, if a bridge has to be made," cried my wife impatiently. "Why not just take our things on our backs and wade across, as we have done already? The cow and the donkey could carry a great deal." "That they will have to do, in whatever fashion we make the move," said I. "But bags and baskets we must have to put things in, and if you will turn your attention to providing those, I will set about the bridge at once. It will be wanted not once, but continually. The stream will probably swell and be impassable at times, and even as it is, an accident might happen." "Well, well," cried my wife, "I submit to your opinion. Only pray set about it without delay, for I long to be off. It is an excellent idea to make a strong place among the cliffs here. The gunpowder especially I shall be delighted to see stored here when we go away, for it is frightfully dangerous to keep so much as we have close to our habitation." "Gunpowder is indeed the most dangerous, and at the same time the most useful thing we have," said I. "And for both these reasons we must be especially careful of it. In time I will hollow out a place in the rock where we can store it safe from either fire or damp." By this morning's consultation we had settled the weighty question of our change of abode, and also chalked out work for the day. When the children heard of the proposed move, their joy was boundless. They began at once to talk of it as our journey to the promised land, and only regretted that time must be wasted, as they said, in bridge building before it could be undertaken. Everyone being impatient for breakfast, that work might be begun at once, the cow and goats were milked, and having enjoyed a comfortable meal of biscuit boiled in milk, I prepared to start for the wreck in order to obtain planks for the proposed bridge. Ernest as well as Fritz accompanied me, and we were soon within the influence of the current, and were carried swiftly out to sea. Fritz was steering, and we had no sooner passed beyond the islet at the entrance of the bay so as to come in sight of its seaward beach, than we were astonished to see a countless multitude of sea-birds, gulls and others, which rose like a cloud into the air, disturbed by our approach, and deafened us by their wild and screaming cries. Fritz caught up his gun, and would have sent a shot among them had I permitted it. I was very curious to find out what could be the great attraction for all this swarm of feathered fowl. And availing myself of a fresh breeze from the sea, I set the sail and directed our course towards the island. The swelling sail and flying pennant charmed Ernest, while Fritz bent his keen eyes eagerly towards the sandy shore where the flocks of birds were again settling. Presently he shouted, "Aha! Now I see what they are after. They have got a huge monster of a fish there, and a proper feast they are making. Let's have a nearer look at it, father." We could not take our boat very close in, but we managed to effect a landing at a short distance from the festive scene, and, securing the raft by casting a rope round a large stone, we cautiously drew near the object of interest. It proved to be a monstrous fish, on whose flesh these multitudes of birds were ravenously feeding, and it was extraordinary to watch the ferocity, the envy, the gluttony, and all manner of evil passions exhibited among the guests at this banquet. "There was nothing on the sandy beach when we passed yesterday, I am certain, father," said Fritz. "It seems strange to see this creature stranded here." "Why, Fritz," cried Ernest, "it must be the shark. Your shark, you know. I believe I can see why you hit him in the head." "You are right, I do believe, Ernest," said I, "though I think your imagination only can distinguish the gunshot wounds among all the pecking and tearing of the voracious birds there. Just look, boys, at those terrific jaws beneath the strangely projecting snout. See the rows upon rows of murderous teeth, and thank God we were delivered from them. Let us try if we can induce these greedy birds to spare us a bit of the shark's skin. It is extremely rough, and when dry may be used like a file." Ernest drew the ramrod from his gun, and charged so manfully into the crowd that, striking right and left, he speedily killed several, whilst most of the others took to fright. Fritz detached some broad strips of skin with his knife, and we returned towards the boat. Perceiving with satisfaction that the shore was strewn with just the sort of boards and planks I wanted, I lost no time in collecting them, and, forming a raft to tow after us, we were in a short time able to direct our course homeward without visiting the wreck at all. As we sailed along, extremely well pleased with our good fortune, Fritz, by my direction, nailed part of the shark's skin flat on boards to dry in the sun, and the rest on the rounded mast. By this time we were close inshore, and lowering the sail, we soon had our craft with the raft in tow safely moored to the bank. No one was in sight, not a sound to be heard. So with united voice we gave a loud, cheery hello, which after a while was answered in shrill tones, and my wife with her 2 boys came running from behind the high rocks between us and the stream, each carrying a small bundle in a handkerchief, while little Franz held aloft a landing net. Our return so soon was quite unexpected, and they anxiously inquired the reason, which we soon explained. And then the mysterious bundles were opened, and a great number of fine crawfish displayed, whose efforts to escape by scuttling away in every direction directly they were placed in a heap on the ground caused immense fun and laughter as the boys pursued and brought them back, only to find others scrambling off in a dozen different ways. "Now, father, have we not done well today?" cried Jack. "Did you ever see such a splendid crawfish? Oh, there were thousands of them, and I am sure we have got 200 here at least. Just look at their claws." "No doubt you were the discoverer of these fine crabs, eh, Jack?" said I. "No, "Fancy young Franz being the lucky man," answered he. "He and I went towards the stream while Mother was busy, just to look for a good place for the bridge. Franz was picking up pebbles and alabasters, some because they were so pretty, some to strike sparks with in the dark, and some he insisted were gold. 'Jack, Jack!' cried he presently, 'come and see the crabs on Fritz's jackal.' You know he threw it away there, and to be sure it was swarming with these creatures. Are you glad we have found them, Father? Will they be good to eat?" "Very excellent, my boy, and we may be thankful that food for our wants is thus provided day by day." When each party had related the day's adventures, and while my wife was cooking the crawfish, we went to bring our store of planks to land. Even this apparently simple operation required thought, and I had to improvise rope harness for the cow and the donkey, by which we could make them drag each board separately from the water's edge to the margin of the stream. Jack showed me where he thought the bridge should be, and I certainly saw no better place, as the banks were at that point tolerably close to one another, steep, and of about equal height. "How shall we find out if our planks are long enough to reach across?" said I. "A surveyor's table would be useful now." "What do you say to a ball of string, Father?" said Ernest. "Tie one end to a stone, throw it across, then draw it back and measure the line." Adopting my son's idea, we speedily ascertained the distance across to be 18 feet. Then, allowing 3 feet more at each side, I calculated 24 feet as the necessary length of the boards. The question as to how the planks were to be laid across was a difficult one. We resolved to discuss it during dinner, to which we were now summoned, and my wife, as we sat resting, displayed to me her needlework. With hard labor had she made 2 large canvas bags for the ass to carry. Having no suitable needle, she had been obliged to bore the hole for each stitch with a nail, and gained great praise for her ingenuity and patience. Dinner was quickly dispatched, as we were all eager to continue our engineering work. A scheme had occurred to me for conveying one end of a plank across the water, and I set about it in this way. There fortunately were 1 or 2 trees close to the stream on either side. I attached a rope pretty near one end of a beam, and slung it loosely to the tree beside us. Then, fastening a long rope to the other end, I crossed with it by means of broken rocks and stones, and having a pulley and block, I soon arranged the rope on a strong limb of the opposite tree, again returning with the end to our own side. Now, putting my idea to the proof, I brought the ass and the cow, and fastening this rope to the harness I had previously contrived for them, I drove them steadily away from the bank. To my great satisfaction, and the surprise and delight of the boys, the end of the plank which had been laid alongside the stream began gently to move, rose higher, turned, and soon projecting over the water, continued to advance, until, having described the segment of a circle, it reached the opposite bank. I stopped my team. The plank rested on the ground. The bridge was made. So at least thought Fritz and Jack, who in a moment were lightly running across the narrow way, shouting joyfully as they sprang to the other side. Our work now was comparatively easy. A second and third plank were laid beside the first, and when these were carefully secured at each end of the ground and of the trees, we very quickly laid short boards side by side across the beams, the boys nailing them lightly down as I sawed them in lengths. And when this was done, our bridge was pronounced complete. Nothing could exceed the excitement of the children. They danced to and fro on the wonderful structure, singing, shouting, and cutting the wildest capers. I must confess I heartily sympathized with their triumphant feelings. Now that the work was done, we began to feel how much we were fatigued, and gladly returned to our tent for refreshment and repose. Next morning, while we breakfasted, I made a little speech to my sons on the subject of the important move we were about to make, wishing to impress them with a sense of the absolute necessity of great caution. "Remember," said I, "that although you all begin to feel very much at your ease here, we are yet complete strangers to a variety of dangers which may surprise us unawares. I charge you, therefore, to maintain good order and keep together on the march. No darting off into byways, Jack. No lingering behind to philosophize, Ernest. And now, all hands to work." The greatest activity instantly prevailed in our camp. Some collected provisions, others packed kitchen utensils, tools, ropes, and hammocks, arranging them as burdens for the cow and ass. My wife pleaded for a seat on the latter for her little Franz, and assuring me likewise that she could not possibly leave the poultry, even for a night, nor exist an hour without her magic bag, I agreed to do my best to please her, without downright cruelty to animals. Away ran the children to catch the cocks and hens. Great chasing, fluttering, and cackling ensued, but with no success whatever, until my wife recalled her panting sons and, scattering some handfuls of grain within the open tent, soon decoyed the fowls and pigeons into the enclosure, where, when the curtain was dropped, they were easily caught, tied together, and placed on the cow. This amiable and phlegmatic animal had stood calmly chewing the cud, while package after package was disposed on her broad back, nor did she now object even to this noisy addition to her load. I placed a couple of half-hoops over all, and, spreading sailcloth on them, put the fowls in darkness, and they rapidly became quiet, and the cow, with the appearance of having a small wagon on her back, was ready to start. Franz was firmly seated on the ass, amid bags and bundles of all sorts and sizes. They rose about him like cushions and pillows, and his curly head rested on the precious magic bag, which surmounted all the rest. Having filled the tent with the things we left behind, closing it carefully, and ranging chests and casks around it, we were finally ready to be off, each well-equipped and in the highest spirits. Fritz and his mother led the van, Franz, the young cavalier, and the sober-minded cow followed them closely. Jack conducted the goats. One of these had also a rider, for Nips, the monkey, was seated on his foster mother, whose patience was sorely tried by his restlessness and playful tricks. The sheep were under Ernest's care, and I brought up the rear of this patriarchal band, while the two dogs kept constantly running backwards and forwards in the character of aides de camp. With honest pride, I introduced my wife to my bridge, and after receiving from her what I considered well-merited praise for my skill in its construction, we passed over it in grand procession, reinforced unexpectedly on the opposite side by the arrival of our cross-grained old sow. The perverse creature had obstinately resisted our attempts to bring her with us, but finding herself deserted, had followed of her own accord, testifying in the most unmistakable manner, by angry grunts and squeals, her entire disapproval of our proceedings. I soon found we must, as before, turn down to the sea beach, for not only did the rank grass impede our progress, but it also tempted the animals to break away from us, and but for our watchful dogs, we might have lost several of them. On the firm, open sands, we were making good way, when, to my annoyance, both our dogs suddenly left us, and springing into the thick cover to our right, commenced a furious barking, followed by a howling, as if in fear and violent pain. Not for a moment doubting that some dangerous animal was at hand, I hastened to the spot, remarking as I went the characteristic behavior of my three sons. Fritz cocked his gun and advanced boldly, but with caution. Ernest looked disconcerted and drew back, but got ready to fire, while Jack hurried after Fritz without so much as unslinging his gun from his shoulders. Before I could come up with him, I heard Jack shouting excitedly, "Father! Father! Come quickly! A huge porcupine! A most enormous porcupine!" Sure enough, the dogs were rushing round and round a porcupine, and having attempted to seize it, were already severely wounded by its quills. Each time they came near, the creature, with a rattling noise, bristled up its spines. Somewhat to my amusement, while we were looking at the curious defense this creature was making, little Jack stepped close up to it with a pocket pistol in his hand and shot it dead, making sure of it by a couple of hearty raps on the head. And then, giving way to a burst of boyish exultation, he called upon us to help to convey his prize to his mother. This it was not by any means easy to do. Sundry attempts resulted in bloody fingers, till Jack, taking his pocket handkerchief and fastening one corner round its neck, ran off, dragging it after him to where his mother awaited us. "Hello, Mother! Here's a jolly beast, isn't it? I shot it, and it's good to eat. Father says so. I only wish you had seen how it terrified the dogs, and heard the rattling and rustling of its spines. Oh, it is a fearful creature." Ernest, examining it carefully, pronounced its incisor teeth, its ears and feet, to resemble those of the human race, and pointed out the curious crest of stiff hairs on its head and neck. "I have read of another species," said he, "called the tuft-tailed porcupine, which must be even more curious-looking than this is. It has short, flat quills, and a scaly tail ending in an extraordinary tuft, like a bunch of narrow strips of parchment. It cannot be such a disagreeable enemy to encounter as this fellow." "Were you not afraid, Jack," asked I, "lest the porcupine should cast some of his quills like darts at you?" "Of course not," returned he. "I know well enough that is nothing but a fable." "A fable?" said I. "Why, look at your mother. She is drawing 5 or 6 spines out of each of the dogs." "Ah, those stuck into them when they so fiercely fell upon it in their attack. Those are the shortest quills, and seem very slightly fixed in its skin. The long quills bent aside when Juno pressed against them." "You are perfectly right, my boy," said I. "There is no truth in the old idea of shooting out the spines. But now, shall we leave this prickly booty of yours, or attempt to take it with us?" "Oh, please, Father, let us take it. Why, it is good to eat." Smiling at the child's eagerness, and willing to please him, I made a somewhat awkward bundle of the porcupine, wrapping it in several folds of cloth, and added it to the donkey's load. Our party then resumed the march, which, with little interruption, was continued steadily until we came in sight of our future place of residence. The wonderful appearance of the enormous trees, and the calm beauty of the spot altogether, fully came up to the enthusiastic description which had been given to me, and my wife gladly heard me say that if an abode could be contrived among the branches, it would be the safest and most charming home in the world. We hastily unloaded the ass and cow, securing them, as well as the sheep and goats, by tying their forefeet loosely together. The doves and poultry were set at liberty, and we sat down to rest among the soft herbage while we laid our plans for the night. Fritz soon left us, but presently 2 shots were fired, and he appeared holding a fine tiger cat by the hind legs, which, with the intensest delight, he exhibited to each in turn. "Well done, Fritz," cried I. "Our cocks and hens would have had an unfortunate night of it, but for this lucky shot of yours. It is to be hoped he has left no companion near at hand. You must be on the lookout. But now, Fritz, tell us how you obtained your prize." Observing that something moved among the branches, said he, I went softly round the tree with my gun, and making sure the creature was a wildcat, I fired and brought it down. It was severely wounded, but rising in a fury, it attempted to climb the tree, when I, luckily having a loaded pistol, gave it a quietus. And do tell me, father, what sort of cat it is. It is a mercy the brute did not fly at your throat instead of attempting to escape, said I. It belongs to a fierce and bloodthirsty race, that of the ocelots, or tiger cats, natives of the tropical parts of America. I should say this was a margay, and as it would have proved a cruel foe, not only of our poultry, but also of our sheep and goats, I am well pleased that you have rid us of it. May I have the beautiful skin, father, and will you tell me what will be the best use to make of it? I advise you to skin the animal very carefully, and of the handsome black and yellow tail, make a hunting belt for yourself. The paws, let me see. Why, I fancy the paws might be made famous cases for knife, fork, and spoon, and look well hanging from the belt. The skin of the body you had better preserve until you find some suitable use for it. Oh, father, what a splendid plan, cried Jack. Do tell me some good use for my porcupine. I think its feet may make cases also. At least you may try. The quills, I am sure, may be used for packing needles and for tipping arrows, and I should try to make defensive armor for the dogs out of the rest. They may fall in with foes more dangerous than any we have yet seen. To be sure, father, the very thing, shouted Jack in high glee. I have seen pictures of boar hunts in which the dogs were protected by a sort of leather coat of mail. That will be grand. After giving this advice, I got no peace until I had shown my boys how to act upon it, and in a short time each had his prize fastened up by the hind legs, and carefully slitting the skin, was stripping it from the carcass. Ernest, meanwhile, was fetching large flat stones in order to form a fireplace, while Franz gathered sticks, as his mother was anxious to prepare some food. What sort of tree do you suppose this to be, father? Inquired Ernest, seeing me examining that under which we were encamping. Is not the leaf something like a walnut? There is a resemblance, but in my opinion these gigantic trees must be mangroves or wild figs. I have heard their enormous height described, and also the peculiarity of the arching roots supporting the main trunk raised above the soil. Just then little Franz came up with a large bundle of sticks, and his mouth full of something he was eating with evident satisfaction. "Oh, mother," cried he, "this is so good, so delicious." "Greedy little boy," exclaimed she in a fright. "What have you got there? Don't swallow it, whatever you do. Very likely it is poisonous. Spit it all out this minute." And his anxious mother quickly extracted from the rosy little mouth the remains of a small fig. "Where did you find this?" said I. "There are thousands lying among the grass yonder," replied the little boy. "They taste very nice. I thought poison was nasty. Do you think they will hurt me? The pigeons and the hens are gobbling them up with all their might and main, papa." "I think you have no cause for alarm, dear wife," I said. "The trees seem to be the fig-bearing mangrove of the Antilles. But remember, Franz, you must never eat anything without first showing it to me. Never mind how good it seems. If birds and monkeys eat a fruit or vegetable, it is usually safe to believe it wholesome," added I, turning to the other boys, who, instantly taking the hint, coaxed Franz to give them the figs he still had in his pocket, and ran to offer them to Nips, who was closely watching the skinning of the tiger cat and porcupine, apparently giving his opinion on the subject with much chattering and gesticulation. "Here, Nips, allow me to present you with a fig," cried Jack, holding one out to the funny little creature. Nips took it readily, and after turning it about, and sniffing and smelling it, he popped it into his mouth with such a droll grimace of delight and satisfaction that the boys all laughed and clapped their hands, crying, "Bravo, Nips! You know a good thing when you see it, don't you, old fellow? Hurrah!" My wife, with her mind set at rest on the question of the figs, now continued her preparations for dinner. The flesh of the margay was given to the dogs, but part of the porcupine was put on the fire to boil, while we reserved the rest for roasting. I employed myself in contriving needles for my wife's work by boring holes at one end of the quills, which I did by means of a red-hot nail, and I soon had a nice packet of various sizes, which pleased her immensely. I also laid plans for making proper harness for our beasts of burden, but could not attempt to begin that while so many wants more pressing demanded attention. We examined the different trees, and chose one which seemed most suited to our purpose. The branches spread at a great height above us, and I made the boys try if it were possible to throw sticks or stones over one of these, my intention being to construct a rope ladder if we could once succeed in getting a string across a strong bough. Finding we could not succeed in that way, I resolved other schemes in my mind, and meantime went with Jack and Fritz to a small brook close by, where I showed them how to place the skins to steep and soften in the water, with stones placed on them to keep them beneath the surface. When dinner was over, I prepared our night quarters. I first slung our hammocks from the roots of the tree, which, meeting above us, formed an arched roof. Then, covering the whole with sailcloth, we made a temporary tent, which would at least keep off the night damps and noxious insects. Leaving my wife engaged in making a set of harness for the ass and cow, whose strength I intended to employ the following day in drawing the beams up to our tree, I walked down with Fritz and Ernest to the beach to look for wood suitable for building our new abode, and also to discover, if possible, some light rods to form a ladder. For some time we hunted in vain. Nothing but rough driftwood was to be seen, utterly unfit for our purpose. Ernest at length pointed out a quantity of bamboos half buried in the sand. These were exactly what I wanted, and stripping them of their leaves, I cut them into lengths of about 5 feet each. These I bound in bundles to carry to the tree, and then began to look about for some slight reeds to serve as arrows. I presently saw what I required in a copse at a little distance.
This book is continued on Disc 3.